Hello and welcome back to the Genesis Designs and Modelcraft bench, and tonight I'm going to do a quick snip review with you with this Arma Hobby P-51. So this is a kit, as soon as I saw that it was being released I quite looked forward to. I'm not, I must confess, a massive Mustang fan or anything, but I do like the earlier version with the high back, and honestly good 1/72 P-51s have never been thick on the ground, and knowing that Arma Hobby do a nice little kit, I thought, yeah, this could be good. So I eventually managed to get one. They haven't been they've actually been out since last year, but I haven't been able to get one before now. I got this from Andy at Antics in Bristol, Antics Online. I think retail price for this is around about £26. End opening box. No, this isn't a box review, but does anybody like end opening boxes? I find them pretty damned irritating, because I'm one of these people who never finishes a model in a sitting. I mean, I don't suppose that many people do, but end opening boxes, you can't just put all the bits back in the box for the next time, can you? So you get on the back of said box some colour artwork of the various different decal options involved in the kit, but we'll look at those in a bit more detail in a minute. Peely sticky bag with everything in it. Let's get that out and separate things off. So the main part of the kit is distributed over these two sprues. So we'll look at the big one first, the main sprue, and clearly this holds all the main parts. And the thing that should strike you instantly when you get one of these is the finish on these parts. These main sort of external airframe parts, if you like, have got the most beautiful satin finish to them. They're absolutely glorious. Bring that up close and hopefully the camera will play. Can you see this surface detail? So that riveted area behind the reel wells there actually sports some panting. Now I know you modelers like to call it oil canning, but the correct term is panting. So there's some ripply skin effects here in these areas, as well as both raised and recessed rivet detail. The panel lines themselves are absolutely beautiful. They're fine, they're crisp, they're deep, square, they're absolutely beautiful. You couldn't ask for anything better. But the only riveting is sort of selected sort of panel fastenings and that little area on the bottom of the wing there. It's not it's not a fully riveted airframe. Other than the main airframe components, on this rack we've got different types of aerial down here. I'm trying out my grey cutting mat, so you know, I don't know if this is really going to work, but there's only one way to find out, isn't there? Yeah, two different types of aerial down there. Cockpit details around this area here, wheel bay details. So the wheel bay on this does have that straight sort of rear spar, which is part of the wing structure, correctly, so it comes back. It is correctly done, which has been a thing in P-51 kits forever, that the wheel bays follow this aperture, but they don't on the real aircraft. It goes back to the spar. So yeah, wheel bay detail there. That's your internal sort of fuel tank. Two different tail planes, undercarriage doors, two different fins, and your fuselage parts. So let's note, insert here. Why have we got two different tail planes and two different fins? Well, the reason is that the kit caters for the filletless tail of the earlier aircraft, so you have a completely separate tail plane and fin to cater for that in each case. We've also got some quite nice moulded in internal detail for that wheel bay, and also fuselage halves around the cockpit and indeed the tail wheel aperture. So the second sprue then, the remainder of the airframe parts. So you've got flaps here. They're designed to be fitted in the lowered position, and if I come up close again and try to catch it, we have also got oil canning and indeed raised rivets, as well as recessed on these flat parts. absolutely glorious, really beautifully done. Got your radiator scoop parts there, some more undercarriage doors, the ones that fit to the legs, intake scoops, the actual radiator core there. Two different types of exhaust, shrouded and unshrouded. They are not moulded with a hole in the end. Pilot seat, spinner, tail wheel, rudder pedals. The main wheels have got a flat moulded into them, so a weighted effect is already there. Remember we mentioned the insert a second ago. You have three different styles of panel to fill that insert. The sort of hold panel, the sort of dots effect for the holes there, the louvered kind, and a plain kind. So that covers most of the options, I think, for that area. Undercarriage legs and control column. 250-pound bombs, or is it kilos? I think it's pounds. Propeller, and then two different sizes of drop tank, the sort of standard 90 litre and then the bigger paper style tanks. All of this, as you can see, is just beautifully moulded. It really is absolutely top notch. And note that that satin finish is not present on these parts. It's really only those main airframe parts that have been treated to that. Transparencies then, in a separate little bag. And again we've got a few options here. Absolutely gorgeous, really wonderful clarity here, very very pristine. There's no sort of marks or scratches on these. The windscreen part has got a section of the fuselage upper moulded into it, so that moves the point of the seam away from the actual window frames, which makes it easier to disguise the joint should you need to. You then have the early heavily framed, get back in the frame woman, early heavily framed canopy here in both closed and open form. The aft windows for the sides, and then two different bubble hoods or Malcolm hoods. We've also got a selection of smaller parts for sort of landing lights and such here. But again, just fabulous clarity, really really nicely done. The frames aren't overly heavy, but at the same time they're also not overly sharp, so particularly in the case of this piece they may not be the easiest thing to mask if you're not using a mask set that's already cut. Practicalities, isn't it? Get those put away. And we move on to this part. This is the Expert kit, the original release. As many of you are probably aware, Arma have various different levels that they do, the Expert set being the higher level, so it includes extras like photo etch and mask. And this is the photo etch sheet for this kit, and it is very very basic. It simply adds seat harness and radiator faces, really. Couple of very small parts. This is not, it's not a big set at all. And then also in this little baggie is a mask set. Now this is the vinyl type rather than the sort of kabuki tape. Now, and with the canopy on this kit, on this aircraft being quite, dare I say, slabby, you'd probably get away with this anyway. But if I can get the cut, there you go. See, that's pre-cut for the canopy and the wheels, essentially. A couple of other areas. We'll have a look at the instructions, and that should point out what the other ones are. Spectacular mask putting back in bag fail. I've got to have a fail on every video, it seems. There we go, we're in. Right then, instructions. There's a bit of history on the front. Pause to read should you wish. We've got paint callouts in Hataka, AK Real Colour, Life Colour, Ammo, Humbrol, Vallejo and Tamiya Acrylic. It's pretty comprehensive and covers what most people are using. Schematic of the decals, and of all the various sprues, masks, photo etch, etc. all there, nice and small, not taking up loads of space. The instructions themselves, I happen to think are really nicely done. This is a little glossy sort of A5 booklet, but it's all done in colour. So the paint colours are called out with the letter codes, as denoted there, but they're also kind of coloured in to a degree. Now obviously not super accurately, but it gives you a bit of an idea of what's going on at a glance. Shows you that adding the PE to the seat there. Excuse me. I also can't do a video without sniffing. All your stuff for behind the pilot's seat, the fuel tank with the various radio sets on top of it. Instrument panel itself, this is showing you, these are all decals, so we've got various decals to cover the instrument panel. People may have mixed views on that, but to be honest, in 1/72 scale, I'm quite happy with that. I think decals are fine if they're nicely done. And moving across to the inside of the fuselage, you've got numerous little panels and stencils as decals to go on here, which I think is a great touch, really. Continuing on, various transparencies to add or not, and then moving on to building the radiator scoop and the inside of the tail wheel bay. All of the parts have got comprehensive colour call-outs on them, and I think the drawings are quite they're quite well laid out, and it's quite obvious what they want, but they've highlighted things in text so that you know what you're trying to do with each step. More of the same here, carrying on until the point where we're joining everything together. And then we have the addition of some of the sort of CAD rendering 3D style graphics, which can be really useful to really show you, and that's what they're being used for here, is to really just show you how these things put together. It's sometimes easier than just in line graphic form. And yeah, it's all obvious basic sort of constructions, nothing shocking in any of this. So there's various different options for the canopies. That's obviously going to be decided on which scheme that you choose, and then your armaments at the end. This diagram here is for stencil placement, should you wish to use them, and then we're on to the decal schemes. So the first one we've got is Ding Hao or Ding Ho from Major James Howard of the 356 Fighter Squadron, based at Boxstead in the UK. Quite a famous aircraft. It's olive drab over neutral grey with some white theatre markings on it. Then we have an RAF marked Mustang 3 from a Polish squadron, 309. That's RAF camouflage with some white theatre markings on it, and the sky tail band is a little bit different. Natural metal, Azel / Boomerang, Tactical Reconnaissance Squadron. This was flown from Chalgrove in the UK by 2nd Lieutenant Stanley F.H. Newman during the preparation for D-Day in spring 1944. This one's Royal Australian Air Force. It's got a blue rudder with stars on it. It's quite attractive together with that red spinner, but is otherwise standard RAF day fighter camouflage. This one's Snooky. This is a 382nd flying out of France in July 44. Quite an attractive one too. We've got D-Day stripes and a yellow nose on there. And then we have two versions of the same aircraft, I think. This is Evelina, pilot First Lieutenant Oliver Strawbridge, 26th Fighter Squadron in China, 1945. I do like this one, and this is the one that I will do. I can't really resist a shark's mouth, to be honest. So this one is all metal finish with the painted wing and American markings. And then on the back page, it's the same aircraft. Yeah, same aircraft, but the America stars have been painted over with red circles. So you can choose each different version of that one. But I do like that. It's a lovely shark's mouth. So I think that's the version I'm going to settle on. And then finally, for the contents, you've got the decal sheet. And bearing bearing in mind the diminutive size of the model and the small scale, this is a fairly substantial sheet, I think you'll agree. As you can see, it's a glossy one. The decals are not overly thick, and the carrier film is quite tight to the image in most cases. You do get decals for the checkered markings on the various ones. They may be a bit tricky. I don't know. It's hard to say, but at this scale, they're probably not the easiest thing to mask out either. So pay your money and take your choice. But all of your national markings and individual aircraft markings are covered there, and then this area here is stencils, but it's stencils with a difference. First of all, for some reason, I don't know why, there are 2 sets of everything, which is amazing. But these, as they go through the K ones, all of these are the cockpit ones. Don't know if it's really gonna, so all of those instrument panel markings are there in this area. Then you've got all the stencils here, these are for the armament, and you've also got decal seat belts and propeller decals there. So decal seat belts for people who can't be bothered with photo etch, really, because not everybody can be bothered with photo etch, let's face it. But that's an absolutely gorgeous decal sheet. I've not used Arma Hobby decals yet, so I don't know how it's going to work in practice, but it looks fantastic as it's printed. Anyway, enough of that. Suffice to say that the contents as they come in the box look completely wonderful, and it looks like being a really great build. I have seen one of these built up by Drew Manton, and it certainly looked the part, and he didn't raise any real complaints about it. But I've not seen anything negative about it. But let's get snipping. Snippity doodah. Get the parts off and we'll see how it sellotapes together for ourselves. So let's go with the snipping. Alright, we're back. I have snipperooed and cleaned up 23 zillion sprue stubs. So there's a lot of them. This is not a short run kit, okay? It's tempting to think of it because it's a sort of a smaller manufacturer. Don't be fooled, this is not a short run kit. They make a big thing actually about the fact that they use the expensive moulds, but there are a lot of attachment points on these parts. But perhaps more importantly is the way that they attach. Now, if we look at this wing half, now this is a very thin, finely moulded thing. And from the joint face point of view, you can see that those sprue stubs are not an issue. But look at the actual outside of the model face and note how the pore stub, the sprue, whatever you want to call it, actually overlaps onto the surface of the model. And not just a little bit, it's big. An excellent example again, this is the main sort of intake piece, if you like. It's the nose of the main radiator intake, and look how large the stub is on the top of that. It doesn't matter because you can't see the top, but it's a small fragile part, and that is a massive attachment point to have to clean up. And likewise the two on either side again protrude in a big way onto the face of the part. So it's not a major issue, okay? I'm not complaining, I'm not being a snowflake about this, but the issue is it does make cleanup significantly more complicated, but the plastic's quite soft, so you can't snip it, at least not with my Tamiya nippers. You can't snip it too close because the way these cut the plastic, they tend to also pull it a little bit because of the angle on the jaws. And that, with this type of fit, this type of sort of join, for want of a better word, if you're not careful, will actually just pull a chunk out of your part, which clearly you don't want. And in a couple of places, let me find, this is one of them. The sprue stubs are so large that there's actually a void in the middle of it. Now you know you sometimes get kind of a hollowness going on sprues on the racks themselves. You can see here, hopefully, there's actually a hole there that was in the middle. I can't make my brain do this back to front. That's in the middle of that spruce stub. That's not something I've done. I've snipped it off and then trimmed it back to flush, and there's that hole there. So as well as having to deal with the joint, there are a few sort of marks and voids and what have you caused by these immense spruce stubs in combination with the quite a soft plastic. Right then, essential quick snip review equipment got gained. First off, we'll look at the wing then. So I took off the little spar. There is a central piece as well, but just for what we're doing, I'll use this little spar. But point to note though, quite an interesting one. Probably the first time I've come across full span for both upper and lower wing parts. So I'll just slip the spar into the upper wing because it sits in here nicely against the other structure that's already in there. And we'll pop that together, and it immediately just sort of sandwiches together beautifully. And let us tape. It's pretty obvious that that isn't going to cause any issues for anybody. That fits together absolutely fabulously, and a really very creditable trailing edge that's nice and slender straight away. Obviously will benefit from just a little bit of tidying up anyway, but very, very nice. And you've got enough internal to just that sits together at the correct thickness without any hassle. No issues there whatsoever. The sprue nubs, you can probably see them as I'm sort of rolling the part around in my hands. They are still there a little bit. That one's still not really trimmed. This is the kind of thing, because these parts are quite flexible and thin and fine, I'll sort of trim it down to nearly there, but then leave it until the parts are glued together, because then it's a little bit more sturdy, a little bit easier to work on it, and I'll just finish taking them out as part of the seam removal process. So that's the wing part. Let's see what these flaps do, how these fit. So it's designed to have them fitted in the lowered position, and there you go, they just slot straight into there and fit in. That is in the fully lowered position, so you've got little notches in the upper leading edge of that which coincide, these sort of tabs which coincide with those slots in there, and that just pops in. And clearly with glue that isn't going to be an issue. It's quite a nice firm positive join. Yeah, very good. Put those aside. So the fuselage halves then, I, whilst cleaning it up, did note a little bit of flash. Now the parts themselves, the panel lines on the surface, are absolutely beautiful. Very, very crisp and clean moulding. It's genuinely, it's right up there to almost, if not actually Tamiya levels, that is. But the finishing of it isn't. So what I mean by that, for example, there's quite a pronounced mould seam which may well not really be visible on camera, but it runs along all the way around the inside of there. It also, trimmed it off on one side, runs along the inside of the area where the tailplane seats, and in fact it gets involved all the way around here as well. It just looks like a sort of a raised edge around, all the way around this end of the tail, which you can see quite clearly when you put the rest of the fin on. Actually, the internal areas all fit very nicely indeed. This is the top of the radiator ducting. That slips into position like so, and as you can see where it joins at the back there It's very creditable. The same is true of this part, which forms the sort of the front edge. This one sits into position like that. That forms like the exhaust area of the main radiator. And the cockpit floor, which is also part of the top of the wheel bay, also has some nice positive locations and sits in place really quite nicely. But we can't really put it in with tape, so I'm not going to. So I'll just tape the fuselage halves together without any fettling at all. Because another thing here, and again it's going to be very hard to pick it out I think on camera, but you can see it with the eyes if you look carefully enough. So if this area here, there's a mould seam which takes the form of a raised bar that is halfway the thickness of this area here, which is obviously going to provide some impediment to a good fit. But I like to do this with minimal cleanup, just to show how it's going to fit together if all you do is take the sprue stubs off, really. You may now be able to see that hole a little more clearly on that nose where that big sprue stub was, and the void inside that thick piece of moulding. Back here on the radiator scoop area, you can see that there's a kind of a notch here which has been produced by, again, by cleaning up of the large sprue stub. Now I'm not too bitter about things like that, because I've got to deal with the seam anyway, so it doesn't really matter. But at the same time, if the sprue stubs weren't so extravagant then it wouldn't happen. And the fit at the right at the back here, there's a small gap present there, so it fits really well. And honestly, if you use liquid cement or plastic cement to put it together, the chances are that those tiny imperfections could be kind of melted together anyway. In practice, for me, there's going to be a little bit of preparation required on these seam faces just to get the joint a bit better in the first place. And obviously the majority of the schemes and I mean most of us want to do a bare metal Mustang, so yeah, the reason there's a gap here, I'll try and show it, but just there, another sort of raised mould seam sort of artifact left over, if you like, just along there, and that's what's creating that tiny gap at the back there. As I say, with the use of liquid cement, because it melts the plastic a little bit, chances are that small imperfections like that can be bullied into submission with the glue. But I use super glue for building, so that doesn't happen. I have to make sure the joint is square. Okay, so that's sellotaped together. If I pop the tailplane on now, the filleted tail parts, so for the sort of slightly later aircraft, you've got this really nicely done one piece tailplane with the fillet moulded in, and then the fin that goes with it slots into the top like so. Now if you want to use that one, you actually have to cut an area away along the top here, which is denoted inside with a cut line. The aircraft I will be doing doesn't have that, so I'm not going to cut it away, but the tailplane simply slots into position like so. It is a very good joint, it's nearly perfect but not quite, and I'm sure getting rid of the mould seam along this seat here will actually make it perfect. That just sits on there, and then the fin slots in along the fin, the rudder post, and sits on top. And now that the fin is on, you can hopefully see what I mean about the flash around that square joint. It just produces a sort of non-flush appearance really. So that's going to need a little bit of cleanup. You see it a bit better this side, hopefully. A little bit of cleanup to make that look convincing and like it's all part of the same airframe. It's not bad, but it isn't perfect. Does it need to be perfect? Not necessarily. It's not Lego, is it? but state of the art model kit, new tool, probably ought to be a little bit better than this. But honestly, I think a lot of people would consider that a little bit nitpicky. Alright, so that's that taped in. Does the wing fit? Let's have a look. Bearing in mind I've not cleaned up the sprue joints down here either, but that just, oh yes, look at that. Fits like a beauty, it's like it was made for it. Yeah, that fits absolutely fabulously. No issues there at all. Again, the addition of adhesive will be all it takes to make that a joint that requires no further effort, in my opinion. Especially when you bear in mind the finish change between these parts. It doesn't actually do any harm to have a fairly pronounced panel line between the two. Lovely. Now, just to be adventurous, let's have a look and see if the windscreen fits. As you can see, there's a big cut out there for it, because that part of the forward fuselage structure is included with the windscreen. So that moves the joint away from the edge of the glass panels, which serves to make it less apparent. So even if there is a sort of a big panel line effect, because it's not right next to the transparency, you don't notice it as badly. Again, those sprue stubs are quite emphatic. Do be careful when snipping large sprue stubs on transparent parts, because transparent parts do have a tendency to be much more brittle, and it's quite easy to damage them when snipping off large sprue stubs. Now then, at this stage it is very minimally, very slightly wider than the fuselage halves themselves, but there is no internal structure in there, so I'm not going to judge it badly on that, because the addition of the rest of the cockpit interior will probably mitigate that completely. It doesn't quite want to sit there nicely without glue, but the rest of the hood does fit plenty well enough too. And it's nice that it does, because it's nice to not have to fit the main canopy before you paint things, because then you run the risk of getting the sort of static pieces of dust and sort of bits and pieces that always seem to find their way onto the inside of your transparencies if you have to fit them before paint. But there you go. I think the only real, and I won't say it's troublesome, but the only area of note really is this little bit of flashy nonsense going on there, but it's very minimal. Shouldn't take too much clearing up. And then the aggressive sprue stubs causing issues, but as I say, they're along the joint lines anyway, and the joint lines are going to get dealt with as a matter of course, so these will get done in that same operation. It's no big deal, but it's just something that has to be noted. As I say, I think some people, and I think there's some justification for it honestly, but I think some people might expect an absolutely state-of-the-art modern tool not to have those kind of issues at all. But on the whole, this is a 1/72nd kit with levels of detail and finesse that maybe 10 years ago we'd have been happy to see in a 48 scale kit, and now we're getting them almost routinely in 72nd scale kits. I do have another one incoming. I shall do a quick snip review, I think, as a way of contrast with this IBG Dora. That's going to be coming up in the next couple of weeks, and see how that looks compared to this, because the big difference between the two is the riveting. The Dora is, the airframe's fully riveted, this is not. Personally, I think I prefer this approach, but we'll see how I feel after I look at that Dora. So yeah, £26 roughly. I'm sure I paid something like £26 for this at Antics in Bristol. Did I ever think there'd be a day when we'd pay £26 for a 172nd Mustang? I've got to admit I didn't. But here we are, we're doing it. That's what they cost now. It is a lot. You can buy a 48th Mustang for the same money, but this is, as I just said, state of the art. This has levels of detail and finesse that are worthy of a 48 scale kit, so in truth there's not really any reason why it should be any cheaper. And if you're getting a kit to this standard for that money, I'm quite happy to pay it. And with that said, we'll leave the review there. I am going to build this, and I will feature it in some way on the channel, either as a sort of compressed single build video or maybe as a very small mini series, but I will be building it and I'll keep you appraised as I go along. But for now, I think, yep, this is a great kit. Go out and get one. The next release is starting to hit the shelves now. The Arma have released it in the lower series without the masks and the etch, and with markings for RAF aircraft, calling it the Mustang 3, so that should be hitting the model shop shelves pretty much as this video comes out, but the plastic parts within are the same as what we've shown here. So there you go, I'll leave it there. Until the next time, look after yourselves, look after each other, and Genesis out.